October 31st, 1974, Halloween night. The kind of night that swallowed sound and stretched shadows until they seemed alive. The streets of Hollow Creek were empty, most children already home with their candy. Porch lights had clicked off one by one, leaving the town's edges in heavy silence. The moon hid behind swollen clouds, smothering any comfort the sky might have given. It was the perfect night to tempt fate. 17-year-old Claire Harper stood at the edge of Mill Road, staring at the house that had frightened her since childhood. Locals called it the Hollow House, though most avoided saying its name at all. She'd grown up hearing whispers about it in the schoolyard, stories told by older kids who swore they'd seen candlelight flickering in the attic windows long after the family inside had disappeared. No one had lived there since the early 1920s, when the Whitmore family had vanished overnight, leaving their supper uneaten on the table and all their belongings in place. Their disappearance had become the town's favorite ghost story, though it was more often told in hushed tones than laughter. Claire had always laughed. Ghosts, curses, haunted families, it all seemed like something out of a cheap paperback novel. She wanted proof, something solid she could tell her friends later. She wanted to stand inside the Hollow House, feel nothing, and prove to herself that all the whispered stories were nothing more than imagination feeding on itself. So she stood there now, her long coat pulled tight against the bite of the October air, flashlight in one hand, a pack of matches in her pocket, just in case. The house loomed before her, its silhouette jagged against the grey sky. The roof sagged in the middle, as if the house were weary of standing, and its windows were black holes staring out into the street. The porch leaned forward like a rotting jaw, boards broken and warped, waiting to snap. The sight alone should have made her turn back. But Claire's pride pressed her forward. Her sneakers crunched over the brittle leaves scattered across the yard, each step sounding far too loud in the silence. The fence that once surrounded the house was broken in 3 places, its pickets jutting up like crooked teeth. She ducked through one of the gaps, her heart drumming harder than she wanted to admit. Standing on the porch, she felt the air change. It was colder here, sharper, as if the house exhaled frost from its hollow lungs. The boards beneath her groaned under her weight, long mournful sounds that echoed in the still night. She paused, gripping her flashlight tighter, telling herself it was only wood and wind. But deep down, she knew the air didn't feel like any autumn night she had ever known. It felt alive, waiting. Claire placed her hand on the front door. The paint had peeled away decades ago, leaving only splinters. It pushed open without resistance, swinging inward, as though it had been expecting her. The darkness inside seemed thicker than the night she left behind. Her flashlight cut through it in a trembling beam, illuminating fragments of the past. An overturned chair, a broken picture frame, scraps of wallpaper dangling like curled skin from the walls. The smell hit her next, damp, mold, and something else beneath it. Something metallic, like rust or blood. She swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. It was only a smell, only the rot of a house that had been empty for 50 years. Nothing more. She stepped inside. The floorboards moaned again, loud enough to make her glance back over her shoulder. The door hung open, framing the safety of the night behind her. For a moment, Claire thought about leaving it that way, but pride pricked at her, and she reached back to push the door closed. The slam echoed like a cannon through the house, rattling the broken frame. Now there was no turning back. Her flashlight beam traveled over the walls, revealing faded portraits still clinging there, their faces blurred by time and mildew. She thought she saw a pair of eyes move in the frame of one picture, but when she froze and shined the light closer, it was only the glossy streak of mold. She exhaled shakily, telling herself again this was only a house, empty, forgotten, dead. Yet as she moved deeper into the hallway, the sound of her footsteps didn't match. She took one step, then another, and after each, she swore she heard a faint echo that came half a second too late, like someone else walking just behind her. She turned quickly, sweeping the flashlight across the hall, nothing but peeling wallpaper and dust. The silence pressed heavier against her ears. She thought of all the kids who had dared each other to come here, but never had the nerve. Tonight, she was the one standing in the hollow house, the one proving it was only a decaying structure. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching, leaning close enough to breathe against the back of her neck. Her light flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere upstairs, a board creaked. The sound was faint, but deliberate, like weight shifting, someone moving in a room above. Claire's chest tightened. She told herself it was the wind pushing against the broken roof, the shifting of old wood. But the muddy footprints she was about to find would prove otherwise. The hallway stretched on longer than it should have. Each step Claire took echoing far louder than the last. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself over and over that she was imagining things, but something about the silence pressed down on her, like a heavy hand on her chest. When her flashlight's beam touched the base of the staircase, her pulse jumped. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but as she leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the dust coating the wooden floor, were footprints, not old, not faded, not the kind that would have been left years ago and settled into the dirt. These were fresh, damp, each print darker than the wood around it, as though whoever had walked there had trailed in mud, or something thicker. Her legs stiffened. She hadn't walked there yet. No one else had entered the house with her. And yet, the prints started at the bottom step and went upward, vanishing into the dark curve of the staircase above. Her flashlight shook in her hand as she followed the prints with her eyes. Part of her screamed to leave now, to run back out through the front door and never turn around. But something else, pride, fear of being mocked, or maybe a strange pull from the house itself, drove her forward. The stairs groaned as she stepped onto the first one. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each thump almost loud enough to drown out the sound of her sneakers on the wood. She climbed slowly, the air around her growing colder with every step, until she reached the landing. The footprints ended in front of a narrow door. The wood was swollen with age, cracked and scarred, but somehow it seemed to be waiting for her. The brass knob was icy to the touch, colder than anything she had felt outside. Her hand hesitated. She swallowed, pushed it, and the door creaked open. It was a child's bedroom. Her beam cut across faded wallpaper, the once bright patterns of balloons and clouds, now stained with mildew. A rocking horse sat in the corner, its painted smile chipped away, one glass eye missing. Against the far wall stood a small bed with its frame rusted, and its mattress collapsed inward, like a body had been lying there for decades. But what froze her wasn't the bed, or the toys left behind, or even the cold that seemed heavier in this room than anywhere else. It was the words. On the wall above the bed, smeared in long dripping strokes, were letters so fresh they looked wet. Her throat tightened as she read them. Get out. The words were jagged, uneven, as though written in a frenzy. They ran down the wall in streaks that caught the flashlight's glow and shined dark red. Claire told herself it had to be paint. It had to be, but the metallic tang in the air, sharp and familiar, told her otherwise. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the room into blackness. The silence deepened, so heavy she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. And then came the sound, a giggle, high-pitched, childlike, but wrong, drawn out, echoing, as though it came from every corner of the room at once. Her chest locked, refusing to pull in air. She tried to scream, but her voice caught, strangled by terror. Her shaking hands slapped at the flashlight, desperate to bring it back to life, but the darkness only seemed to thicken. Then close to her ear, softer than a whisper, but sharp enough to freeze her blood, She heard it. Claire, her name, spoken by a voice that couldn't possibly know it. The giggle came again, but this time it wasn't alone. Something shifted in the corner, where the rocking horse sat, a faint creak, as though its weight had changed. And then, impossibly, the horse began to rock back and forth in the pitch black. The sound of its wooden legs scraping the floor filled the silence, steady and slow. Claire staggered backward, her shoulder hitting the door frame. She reached for the knob, desperate to flee, but before she could grasp it, something brushed her arm. Small, cold fingers. Her skin prickled, every hair standing on end. The hand didn't let go. It tightened, as if a child were holding on, not affectionately, but possessively. She gasped, jerking against it, but the grip only grew firmer. Her flashlight buzzed back to life for a second, its beam weak and sickly. In that flash, she saw the bed, the walls, the dripping letters, and the tiny outline of a shadow standing just inches from her, shaped like a child, but without a face. The light sputtered again, then died. The hand pulled her gently, insistently, not back toward the hallway, but deeper into the room, toward another door she hadn't seen before, one that led upward, toward the attic. Her heart pounded, her legs resisting, but her arm moved against her will. The door loomed larger. With every step she was dragged forward. She didn't want to open it. She knew, deep in her bones, that nothing good waited behind it. And yet, as the rocking horse creaked, and the whisper of her name hissed again in the dark, she found herself moving toward it anyway. The attic door loomed before her like a waiting mouth. Claire's body trembled, as the small icy hand tugged her forward. She tried to resist, planting her heels against the warped wooden floor, but her muscles no longer felt like her own. The unseen grip guided her, steady and patient, as if whatever held her knew she would not escape. Her breath came in ragged bursts. "Let go," she whispered, though her voice was barely a thread of sound. She knew no one would answer. Still, the hand remained, cold as stone, pulling her step by step, until she stood at the base of the attic door. The brass latch groaned when she touched it, the sound echoing far too loudly in the silence. She hesitated, but the hand at her side pressed harder, urging her forward. With trembling fingers, she lifted the latch. The door swung open with a long, aching creak, and a rush of air spilled out, stale, heavy, suffocating, like the breath of something that had been waiting far too long. Darkness poured down from the attic. It was not the kind of dark Claire had seen in the rest of the house. This was thicker, heavier, almost physical. Her flashlight sputtered again, flickering weakly, and in the broken glow, she caught glimpses, wooden beams arching above like ribs, piles of forgotten trunks, and worst of all, dozens of shapes lining the walls. They looked like mannequins at first, covered in cloth, but as her light swept past, she realized they weren't mannequins at all. They were chairs, and in each chair sat something slumped and human-shaped, their outlines sagging in unnatural ways. The light died again before she could be sure. Her chest tightened. Her legs trembled as she climbed the final step, the unseen hand still clinging to hers. Every board beneath her groaned, the sound echoing like distant cries. She reached the attic floor, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud. The sound sealed her in. She froze, straining to hear anything beyond her own racing heart. Then it came, a rustle, soft, deliberate, like fabric shifting against wood. One of the slumped figures had moved. Her throat closed with panic. She forced her flashlight on again, slapping the metal casing until the beam sputtered to life. For the briefest moment, the attic was revealed, and her breath turned to ice. The chairs were occupied. Figures sat hunched in each one, their bodies pale and shriveled, skin clinging to bones like wax melted over wire. Their heads hung forward, their hair long and stringy, some covering hollow faces. But it wasn't just their stillness that made Claire's blood run cold. It was their eyes. Every single one had empty sockets, gaping black holes where eyes should have been. The light flickered again, plunging her back into darkness, and that was when she heard it. A slow scraping sound, wood against wood. The sound of one of the chairs moving, then another, and another. The rustling grew louder, layered, until it seemed as though the entire attic was stirring awake. Claire backed away, her flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. The shapes shifted, leaning forward, their eyeless faces turning toward her. She stumbled over a loose board, nearly falling, but the cold hand in hers tightened, steadying her. For one terrifying second, she realized it wasn't holding her to help. It was holding her so she couldn't run. Her body jerked, dragged toward the center of the attic. She struggled, pulling against the grip, but her legs felt heavy, her strength useless. Her flashlight beam flashed across the figures again, and this time, their mouths opened, not wide, not screaming, just enough to reveal darkness deeper than the room around them, an emptiness that felt alive. A low hum began to build, vibrating the floor beneath her feet. It wasn't sound at first, it was a pressure in her bones, a rumble in her teeth, like the whole house was groaning through them. Then slowly, the hum twisted into something else, a chorus of whispers, dozens of voices, layered and broken, speaking in a language Claire didn't recognize. The sound rose and fell, echoing off the beams, wrapping around her. She clutched her ears, trying to block it out, but the whispers pressed through her hands, crawling into her skull. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled. The hand yanked her forward again, dragging her toward the middle of the attic. She fought harder, wrenching her arm, her throat raw as she screamed, "Stop, please." Her flashlight clattered to the floor. For a moment, the beam landed on the figures, and she saw something that nearly shattered her mind. Their mouths were no longer whispering. They were all open wider now, impossibly wide, their jaws stretching far beyond human limits. The sound pouring out was no longer a whisper, but a low vibrating moan that shook the air itself. The room throbbed with it, pulsing like a heartbeat. The floor beneath her feet creaked violently. A crack split across the boards, dust raining down into the dark below. She staggered, trying to step back, but the hand pulled her harder, dragging her toward the crack, as if the house itself had chosen her. The boards gave way. The last thing she saw before falling was the circle of eyeless faces above her, mouths gaping in perfect unison, the moan rising into a shriek that pierced her ears. Then she plunged downward into the black, the unseen grip never loosening as it dragged her with it. The fall seemed endless. Claire's scream tore from her throat, but vanished into the black before it could echo. The unseen hand clamped tighter around hers, dragging her down faster than gravity could. Just as she thought her body would shatter against the ground, she hit it, hard, but not enough to kill. The breath slammed out of her lungs, leaving her gasping on the cold dirt floor. Silence pressed in, heavier than before. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat, frantic and uneven. Her flashlight had landed nearby, the beam flickering weakly across stone walls slick with moisture. She hadn't known there was a basement beneath the house. It felt ancient, carved from the earth itself, more like a crypt than a cellar. With shaking hands, she reached for the flashlight. The beam wavered, crawling over the walls, over piles of broken crates, over something that looked like bones stacked carelessly in the corners. At first she told herself they were animal remains, but the shapes were unmistakable. Ribs, skulls, human. Her stomach lurched. They were standing there, 4 figures, not slumped like the ones in the attic, not collapsed into decay, but upright, waiting. Their skin was grey, stretched too tightly across bones, their bodies thin and brittle looking, but it was their faces that froze Claire in place. They had no eyes, just hollow sockets, deeper than any wound should be, as though something had scooped the life out of them. Their mouths opened in unison. The sound that followed was not human. It wasn't even sound. It was vibration, a raw tearing hum that rattled through Claire's chest and made her teeth ache. She clutched her ears, but it didn't help. The noise came from inside her, as if the figures were speaking directly into her bones. She stumbled back,
her flashlight jerking wildly across their forms. They didn't move. They didn't need to. With every pulse of that sound, she felt herself weaken, as though something was being pulled out of her. Her vision blurred, her arms trembled, her body heavy. "No," she gasped, trying to fight it. Her voice cracked. "Leave me alone." The figures leaned forward slightly, their mouths stretching wider. The sound swelled, rising higher, until it was no longer a hum but a shriek.